No resurrection, no faith. No resurrection, you're no good to us as a witness that needs to go forth and say, well, after all is said and done, I saw him, I ate with him, that kind of thing. So in Luke 24, Dr. Luke, we'll call him Dr. Luke this morning just for fun, Dr. Luke, chapter 24, beginning at verse 36 through verse 49. And this is parallel to John. So he's talking about Easter Sunday night kind of thing. So it's a parallel to John 20.
Now as they said these things, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them and said to them, Peace to you.
Now, by the way, the ones that stood there, they're talking about the guys from the road to Emmaus. They ran back to Jerusalem to tell the apostles that they had just been with Jesus. So that's who they are. I'm sorry, go ahead.
But they were terrified and frightened and supposed they had seen a spirit. And he said to them, Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see I have. When he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. But while they still did not believe for joy and marveled, he said to them, Have you any food here? So they grabbed him a piece of broiled fish and some honeycomb, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Then he said to them, These are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me. And he opened their understanding that they might comprehend the scriptures. Then he said to them, Thus it is written, and thus it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead the third day, and that repentance and remission of sins should be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. And you who are witnesses of these things, behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you, but tarry in the city of Jerusalem until you are endued with power from on high.
The way Luke talks about Jesus, however you see him appearing in the room, he goes through great pains to present him as not just a spiritual being, but some kind of physical presence that can eat, that can be touched, whatever. That's a doctor. He's saying, listen, the number one thing, the first thing I wrote down here is the resurrection is real. He was not a phantom. It was not a ghost. He didn't come wisping through the room and we heard a voice from... It was nothing like that. He stood there just like everybody else. We were all in the same room together. He actually asked for something to eat, and he ate it in front of us. So whatever form he was, his glorified body that we talk about, whatever he was there very real. It was not some kind of a ghost or a spiritual encounter or something like that. The guys that had seen him on the road to Emmaus, you can almost think of it like this. When you read it, Jesus at one point, they don't recognize him, but he says to them at one point, because they're all messed up, like we said, they're hopeless, and he says to them, basically, but didn't you ever get it that Messiah was supposed to suffer and die the way he did? And that seems to be what these guys are fixed on. He's dead, and Jesus is alive, but they're seeing him as dead because they never really understood the prophetic word and the whole thing. And somehow they had forgotten that Jesus said he was coming back from the grave. So on the road to Emmaus, Jesus is walking them through and sorting out the fact that what happened was in accordance with the scriptures. And by the time they stop and he breaks the bread and then they recognize it's him, they make the comment, wasn't our hearts burning within us as he spoke? But what was he talking about? The cross. He was talking about the fact that Jesus died and sorting it out. So they weren't seeing him as dead anymore based on their hopeless hope, but that the hope had come, he was alive, not what they expected. And the things that had happened had to happen that way. So by the time their eyes are opened when they're breaking the bread and they realize that it's Jesus, they go running back to Jerusalem to tell the guys that he's alive. But what they're talking about, man, when they said they were telling him these things, They were talking about the fact we got this all sorted out now. We saw Jesus. Now we get why he had to die. You can't be resurrected if you don't die. So the resurrection, according to Dr. Luke's description, is taking place now in when the boys run back. They got the death sorted, but what does Jesus actually look like? It's hard for these guys from Emmaus to tell you, mainly because as soon as they realized it's Jesus, he vanished. Poof, disappears, literally. Doesn't walk out of the room. The word means to disappear. He disappears before their very eyes. So this body that they really were talking to, but never really got to the meal, he breaks the bread and then disappears. Now he's asking for food on Easter Sunday night. Touch me, make sure you know it's me. So Luke is taking the next step as a doctor. The guys on the road to Emmaus, they get the death thing sorted out, and now I want to explain to you, I want you to know what a resurrected Jesus actually looks, feels like, sounds like, the whole thing. Not just in front of two guys, but in front of a small crowd. Number one, the resurrection is real. Number two, the cross is crucial. Not just because of all the prophecies of the Old Testament that Jesus fulfilled, but in order to understand the breaking of the bread and what actually took place, which is very, very important for all of us in this context. Verses 30 and 31.
Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight.
He breaks the bread. Now, people say all kinds of stuff about it. Oh, it reminded him of the Last Supper, or it was like John 6, the feeding. Whatever. The point is that he's taking something that's whole. He's breaking it. And at the Last Supper, he did say, this is my body that's being broken for you. He breaks it, and he's giving it to them. It's a spiritual truth that Luke is trying to convey. They knew it was Jesus because Jesus was the one who broke himself for our sakes and gave. If we know nothing else about God, when John writes, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, if nothing else we know about God, if you want to know God, if you do get to know God, you know he's a giver. That's why it drives me to distraction when people think that he would hold back anything from us. His grace, his love, his peace, his nature, his very being, the essence of love is to give. He's a giver of whatever is necessary. And when these guys see Jesus and he breaks the bread, if nothing else hits, we know that he's breaking something and giving it. They're looking at love. That's what love is. Love will break itself in order to give to the nourishment, the betterment of others. And all of a sudden their eyes are open. Oh my goodness. They see the cross. That's what that was about. He was being broken in order to give us life. He said he was the resurrection and the life. He's come back to give us the life that only he can provide. And like bread is so important to our natural sustenance, especially 2,000 years ago. Bread was huge. Back then, he's making the statement about you need me, and the good news is this. I am so wanting to give you whatever you need to live every day of your lives. And this is the truth that's behind this Emmaus, and they're running. And that's how they knew it was Jesus, at the breaking of the bread, the whole thing. You see, the cross is crucial. It's not just a matter of Jesus dying for us. I'm not saying that's easy, but it's easier to take a cyanide capsule than it is to be beaten, to be humiliated, to be crucified, to be spit on, to have a bag put over your head and people punch you and say, tell us which one did that. The list goes on and on of the abuse that he went through. And remember this, everything that he went through was to say, I know what you're going through. I know what you feel like when somebody puts a bag over your head and whacks you one good. Because they won't face you face to face and say, listen, I'm struggling with this. No, they stick you in the back. I know what it's like for people to mock you when you have something to offer and you're trying to help. And somebody else says, oh, well, they just want this. So, oh my goodness, you've absolutely destroyed my love. And me trying to give something to somebody, something beautiful and wonderful. And Jesus said, I get it. I know what it's like to be totally innocent and be totally abused to the point of death itself. The humiliation, Paul calls it, of death on a cross was humiliating. So the cross becomes the point of us seeing something. And I've said this to people in counseling for years and years and years. It's my go-to, to be honest with you, when they're questioning God about different things. Just ask them, but what do you make of this? What does that say? You cannot possibly doubt the love of God, the love He has for you. When you look at this, how much more love do you want me to show? I mean, there is nothing greater than that, than laying down your life. The cross is the point of identification of God's love, because that's what God wants to be identified as, a lover. We know as parents, if we wanted our kids, if you had to put it all like in one sentence, as close to one word as possible, what we'd say is we want them to know we love them. Yeah, we're going to protect them, we're going to do all kinds of, we're going to provide for them, we're going to teach them, but the thing we want them to know more than anything else, because what will get you through the entire life, the whole journey, is love. I know my dad, I know my mom loved me. Because love does. Love draws. Which is why it drives me crazy when people think that you're going to draw people to Christ by getting them to signing a dotted line with a doctrine of faith. What draws them, and Luke knows it, the cross is crucial, because it is the point of identification of our Father's love for us. But I want to take this a step further in an area that you may not have put this together. You remember, Thomas wasn't there the night of the resurrection. We don't know where he was, but he wasn't there. When they tell him that Jesus is alive in the whole thing, and he says, I won't believe it unless I touch him and the whole thing, he wants a real experience. In John chapter 20, it's the following week, 8 days later, when Jesus appears to the disciples and Thomas is with them. Would you read John chapter 20, verse 27?
Then he said to Thomas, "Reach your finger here, and look at my hands, and reach your hand here, and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing."
See, the thing is, Thomas, this is 8 days later. On Easter Sunday night, John doesn't write anything about kind of like the physical body of Jesus. He writes a conversation, but not much else. Then he writes a little further on, look at the nail scars, look at me, put your finger in my side, the whole thing. Get physical with me. I want you to I want you to touch me.